Everyone, this is Keith Fleming from the Daily Fix Show, flying solo for week 14 as Joe the Brain Matz had a previous engagement. Tonight, we are going to cover my favorite DraftKings plays, 4,500 and below, talk about some of my favorite sportsbook prop bets. Let's go. Again, welcome everyone. I hope that the video and sound on this is okay. I am currently at my sister's house babysitting for two very cute rugrats, my niece and nephew, who are both asleep now, but my sister lives in the sticks, doesn't have the greatest Wi-Fi, so I hope it's not bad. But again, we're going to be touching on our favorite DraftKings plays, or I am, since I'm flying solo, 4,500 and below, giving you my favorite DraftKings sportsbook bets, which are all plus odds, by the way. But before I get into that, first of all, you want to be sure to follow Fantasy in Frames on all social media platforms. That includes YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And give me a follow at Keith Fleming on Twitter/X. I am giving away every 100 followers either a sports card that is an autograph or sports memorabilia. Just in the last week, when I hit 1,800 followers, I gave away a Cal Pitts jersey, a Julio Jones jersey, as well as a DeAndre Hunter PSA 10. When I hit 1,900 followers, got some cool stuff to give away. But before we get into these plays, something you need to take into consideration, especially for DFS and also prop bets, we've got potential really bad weather coming in several games. There's 5 games right now that the weather does not look good. The Rams at Ravens, Lions at Bears, Colts at Bengals, Jags at Browns, and Texans at Jets are in for nasty weather. All are calling for 20-plus mile-an-hour winds. The highest temperature in any of those games being the mid-40s. Potential rain. So just a mess. Me and Joe talked about in our DFS show yesterday on Fantasy Six Pack that it is it's not good. It's actually not the rain that you have to be worried about. It's the wind and the cold weather. So just be sure to pay attention to that, especially for the plays you make. But with that, let's get into my favorite DraftKings plays, 4,500 and below. I mean, you got to love the production value here at Fantasy and Frames. Thank you very much to Gator, Jorge, whoever made that. But let's get right in again to my favorite DraftKings plays for week 14, 4,500 or lower. And I'm going to start with Elijah Moore. Now, he is in one of those bad weather games, playing Jacksonville at home. But if you listened to me on the DFS Den last week, with Dave Eddy, I was filling in for Chris Robin. I actually mentioned Elijah Moore in MME tournaments for DFS, and the only reason was because Joe Flacco was starting. Moore's career average of fantasy points per route is 0.25. With every quarterback not named Joe Flacco, with Joe Flacco, almost 1.5 points per route. And then last week, Moore got a lot of attention from that guy, Joe Flacco. 12 targets, which is a season high. 4 receptions. 83 receiving yards, season high. 12.3 points on DraftKings. That's the second highest total of the season. And then the crazy one, 255 air yards, which that's obviously Moore's season high in air yards. It was the highest air yard number of any wide receiver in all of the NFL this year. Just wild stuff. So, again, this is going to be a potentially bad weather game. You do have to worry about that. But his last 6 games with Flacco, 52 targets, 26 receptions, 8.4 fantasy points, or 4 in 4 of 6 games. Potentially a no Amari Cooper. If Cooper's out, this is a smash play for me. I may even put him in cash lineups if Cooper misses, but definitely an MME. All right, the second player for the Buffalo Bills, Khalil Shakir, 3,900 at the Chiefs. The news of Isaiah Pacheco missing this game makes me like Shakir even more because I think this becomes a passing fest in a game that maybe the Chiefs were going to try to slow down the Buffalo offense by just running it with Pacheco, which they've done a lot lately. They're not going to have that ability unless you believe in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If you do, God bless. Shakir, he now has 3+ receptions in 5 of 6 games, 25 targets in those 5. 9.7 points or more on DK, 3 of his last 5. Big thing, 2 games of 15+ points. While I like him for MME again this week. And in the last 2 weeks, his Kansas City defense, Wicks from the Packers, and Hunter Renfrow of the Las Vegas Raiders, both had at least 40 yards and caught at least 3 passes as the number 3 wide receiver. So there's some opportunity there against this Kansas City defense for Khalil Shakir. My third guy, Isaiah Likely. Shout out to my boy Ryan Murphy from the Inside Drive. I go on it every Wednesday. He is the host of the ESPN Northwest Florida show. He's a Coastal Carolina guy. So is Isaiah Likely. Likely 3,500 versus the Rams. This is, again, another one of those games that's bad weather. I don't know if tight end affects it as much as like being a wide receiver, but Likely so far, his first start of this season with Mark Andrews out, saw 6 targets, 4 receptions, 40 yards. In the 3 games started without Andrews in the last 2 years for his career, 37.5 points scored. That's 12.5 per. 22 targets, over 7 per. And 13 receptions, 4.3 receptions per. And in his games with 6+ targets, which I believe that number is up to 7 now for his career, he's averaging over 15 points per game, 6 receptions per, and 73 yards receiving per game. I think he will see 6+ targets. I'll go ahead and tell you, Likely is a guy that I'm going to have in a lot of DraftKings cash lineups as my tight end. And I think he should definitely deserve consideration for you as well, whether it be, again, a cash game, MME, or even your fantasy leagues. All right, one of my favorite plays this week can be a cash game guy all the way. Jonathan Mingo, he's my 4th player, 3,500 at New Orleans. He's coming off his best game of his career and of the season, and on DraftKings. He scored almost 13 points, 12.9, caught 6 passes for 69 yards on 10 targets. And this is, again, a guy that I spoke about on the DFS Den last week, that the likelihood with a new play caller, which we know Frank Reich's out of there, would probably mean Mingo gets more involved. I mean, he's arguably the most talented wide receiver on this roster, and they spent draft capital on him. And, I mean, what are the Panthers playing for at this point? They don't even have their own draft pick this year. That would be the number 1 pick right now. That kind of stings. But Mingo, he's now scored 10+ points in back-to-back games. After only seeing 38 targets his first 7, that was roughly 5.4 per. He's seen 29 targets in his last 4. That's over 7 per, 7.25, with at least 6 in each one of them. And I know this is a tough matchup, but I love the fact that 36% of Mingo's receiving yards on the season have came in just the last 2 weeks. You can tell that his piece of the passing pie for Carolina is on the rise, and I think he's a safe play. I know it's a tough matchup, but I really like him because of his volume at 3,500 on DraftKings this week. Rounding it out, Cade Otton, 3,100 at my sorry Atlanta Falcons, particularly bad against tight ends. The one advantage of watching a team like the Atlanta Falcons, who happen to be mine, week after week, is you know what we can, or more importantly, can't do on the defensive side of the ball. And they cannot cover tight ends. The Falcons are currently 25th on DraftKings, despite only playing 4 top 12 tight ends in PPR formats thus far this season. Now, it doesn't hurt that those 4 tight ends caught 29 passes for 276 yards and 2 scores, averaging over 15 points per game. But they've shown that other tight ends can have success, including Cade Otton, who we're talking about earlier this year. He scored 9.3 points against my Atlanta Falcons, which, if you understand how cash games play, and my kind of model to doing well in them, is you want to hit 3 times the player's salary. What, 3,100? We're talking about 9.3 points. Hey, he hit it on the number last time. But other guys, again, Hayden Hurst was tight end number 1 week 1 versus his team in Atlanta in a dome, scoring over 15 points. Trey McBride went nuclear against his team earlier this year, was tight end 2 for the week. And Cade Otton is a guy that had a monster game versus another really bad tight end defense in the Houston Texans, where he scored 24 points, was tight end number 2 for the week. And what I love about Otton the most, and why I'm going to be using both in cash games and MME, is he's coming off a game where he had 0 targets and 0 receptions. I think that's going to lead to more people being like, I'm not playing that guy. He didn't even get targeted. But in the previous 6 games, Otton had seen 33 targets. That's a very good value for the position of tight end, especially for a guy only 3,100. And most importantly, he saw 11 red zone targets in just the last 5 weeks. The Falcons have turned into a funnel defense. We are very good against the run, not good against the pass. Obviously, Mike Evans is probably going to do some damage. We can be assured of that. But outside of that, I really like Cade Otton and Rachaad White to catch enough passes. I just love Otton's price at 3,100. All right, let's move on to my favorite prop bets for week 14 from DraftKings Sportsbooks. These are all overs. It's no fun for me to bet unders, and these are all, I think they all are alt lines. We'll find out when I get through my list here in a second. But they're all plus odds. And let's start with an alt receiving line for Joe Mixon, 40-plus yards, plus 265. I really like this, and that's the official pick. But I'll go ahead and tell you, I don't hate 50-plus yards at plus 475 either. In the 2 games with Browning at the quarterback position for the Bengals, which is going to be the case again this week, Mixon's seen 9 targets, 8 receptions. He's had 40-plus yards in both. He set a high in targets last week and receiving yards. The big thing, 36% of his receiving yards for the entire season has came in the last 2 weeks with Browning, the only 2 that Browning has been the starting QB. So that makes me think that obviously Browning is looking at Mixon a lot more than Joe Burrow, probably because Browning is not as likely to chuck it down the field to the 2 great receivers that the Bengals have in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. On top of that, this is a potentially very bad weather game. Again, meaning more underneath, short passes. That's good for Joe Mixon. I think it's only going to increase the amount of targets opportunity he sees when that's already been on the uptick. So I really like the 40-plus yards, which he has hit, again, both of the last 2 weeks with Browning at plus 265. Or if you want to get frisky, you can go 50-plus at plus 475. He has not hit 50 yards yet. But again, with how close he's came in both of the 2 games with Browning and the fact that it's going to be a bad weather game, I think there's a good chance that actually both of those hit. The second, I talked about Cade Otton and how much I like him on DraftKings at 3,100. So why would I not like an alt receiving line of 40-plus yards at plus 245? Stop me if you heard this earlier or if you've listened to any of my other shows. The Falcons cannot cover tight ends. It's awful. This is a number, though, that Otton has eclipsed in 3 of his last 5 games, including that first matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. So it's not that hard to see him doing this. And then in 3 of 4 games this season where Otton has played defenses 25th or worse on DraftKings/PPR leagues, Otton has had 40-plus receiving yards. So against bad teams versus tight ends, he's hit that number 75% of the time. Finally, the Falcons on the season allow almost 9 targets to tight ends, 8.83, 6.25 receptions, and the big thing, 63.33 yards. Why is that the big thing? Because Cade Otton has one of the highest snap shares and route runs of any tight end in the NFL. What that means is he's always on the field and the only tight end that they target in the passing game. So that is probably actually my favorite bet this week because, again, you're getting almost plus 245. That's really good odds for a number that a guy has already hit against his team and has hit 3 of his last 5. All right, staying in the same game, Drake London, alt receiving yards, 70-plus, plus 255. Or again, if you want to get frisky, you can do 80-plus yards for plus 435. London has eclipsed 78 receiving yards or more in his last 3 home games. So there's a theme there. 90.25 yards per game and receiving over those last 4 home games. The only one that he did not hit that 70-plus yards, he had 67. And this Falcons team is just totally different at home. I talked about on our Thursday show with Joe Matz on Fantasy Six Pack why I like both Desmond Ridder and Drake London this week, and it's because they're at home. The Falcons, whether it's Taylor Heineke or Desmond Ridder, much better in the passing game at home for whatever reason. Their last 4 games at home, averaging 35 pass attempts, over 260 yards passing. On the road, that number is only 30 pass attempts per and 150 yards per game, which is just dreadful. So I think it's a very good chance that Drake London eclipses that 70-plus receiving yards against a Tampa Bay defense that, again, just let Jonathan Mingo have his high for the season of 69 yards. And no offense to Jonathan Mingo, he is not the wide receiver yet that Drake London is, and Bryce Young hasn't really played much better than Desmond Ridder. All right, the 4th pick, and this has been something that I've kind of been hammering lately, and that's Desmond Ridder alt rushing yards. 25-plus yards at plus 220. One of my best bets of the season was 2 weeks ago against the New Orleans Saints when it was plus 250 odds for Desmond Ridder to get 25-plus yards versus the Saints. He hit that number early in the second quarter. He's eclipsed this number 4 times in his 9 full games this season. He's eclipsed that number in 2 of his last 4 home games. And he's just going to run. That's what Ridder does, particularly as of late. It seems like the second stint, they are not only making him, run more if there's something not there. They've been banging that into his head that if he doesn't see anything in front of him, he needs to tuck the ball and go. But he's also seeing design runs. And Ridder has the ability to get way over half of that, almost all of that, in just 1 rush attempt. So I really think that there's a good chance Ridder at plus 220 hits 25-plus rushing yards. Then in the final one, I was shocked to see this, but it's Justin Jefferson, alt receiving yards, 80-plus yards, getting plus numbers, plus 120. I mean, really, what is going on? It's the fact that Jefferson's obviously coming back from injury. We have not seen him play yet with Josh Dobbs, but this is Justin Jefferson. He hit that number in all 4 full games he played this season. He hit that number 11 times in 2022 out of 17 games, 10 times in 2021. And the Raiders are not this stellar pass defense. And the great thing is the Vikings can't run the ball. We know that. Alexander Mattison, one of the handful of worst starting running backs in the league. Cam Akers is now done for the year. And it's Justin Jefferson. It's talent. I think that there's a really good chance, obviously, that he hits 80-plus rushing or receiving yards. Now, again, if you want to get frisky, I think 100's all the way up to plus 300. But knowing Justin Jefferson, he could have 80 yards at the half easily. And to get plus odds, that will not happen again the rest of the season for just 80-plus receiving yards. So I really like that. I also do like him this week. I think he's a discount at 8,500 on DraftKings, as well as Devontae Adams. All right, so that is the DraftKings and DK Sportsbook plays. Because Joe is not here, and I wanted to make this video as short as possible so people could listen to it and get the information that they needed, we will get back to doing showdown lineups next week because I like going head-to-head with Joe. I was going to brag about how I beat him last week, but if you look actually at total points, because we do Sunday night and Monday night, he scored more points. But I had the best lineup of the 2 for my lineup on Monday night. But be sure to check out the Sunday morning Fantasy and Frame show where your boy, me, Keith Fleming, plans to actually come on this week. Be sure to follow my Twitter account, which every Saturday night I send out a tweet with my favorite DraftKings cash plays for that week. They have been hitting at a very good rate. I believe like 75%. The last 4 weeks have scored 20-plus points. I'm only giving anywhere from 12 to 15 plays. And as always, you can hit me up on Twitter. I love interacting with my followers. If you ever have any questions on DFS, I'm happy to answer them. You can either just ask them in one of my posts, or you can hit me up in my DMs, either or. But again, be sure to check out Fantasy and Frames. Be sure to follow me. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week 14. You win a bunch of money, and we'll have Joe Matz back next week. But let's hit that great song one more time on our way out. We'll see you guys.